Welcome back. Hope it was a good lunch. And maybe we'll have a few stragglers coming in, but we're going to get fired up and going. Now, to start out with, this is going to be SketchUp and Photoshop. And I will be quite honest with you, this class is a little intimidating to me because I am convinced that there are some better Photoshop users out there than I am. I know some of you probably use it quite often, and I just dabble. So, we'll do what we can, but hopefully we'll be able to point out some things that may be of use to you, which is the point of this. We're not going to take really many of these models and renderings to completion, but hopefully we'll introduce some ideas that you can take with you and just work out on your own and help your own processes. Now, how many of you were here for the last 3D base camp that we had in Boulder? Just a few. Okay, so were any of you in the class that I taught on Photoshop last time? I know. Okay, just a few. How many of you are familiar with what's called the Dennis technique? Okay, a few more. The Dennis technique, for those of you who don't know, is something that was introduced on the forums some time ago, and it became quite popular. It was this huge thread. It's called the Dennis technique because it was one of our SketchUp users named Dennis who brought it sort of to life and introduced it to most people. And then from there, people did spin-offs and variations and created sort of their own way that they would do that. We're going to do that again today, but the point of this is that the Dennis technique, the way that he did it originally, created some really interesting, nice sort of hand-washed effects to your SketchUp models. But it's the technique itself that I hope you walk away with, some of these ideas of that you can do certain things in SketchUp that will help your workflow in Photoshop. So we're not necessarily going to talk about how to render in Photoshop as much as just try and give you some options that you can use in SketchUp, take them to Photoshop, and that will help your workflow there. So, let's find an example. Now, I guess one other thing before I start, and I should mention this, or my buddy Christy's on in the back will wring me by the neck. You don't have to use Photoshop to do most of the stuff that we're going to do. There's a lot of other image editing programs out there. If you have Photoshop and you know it, great. That's why I use Photoshop. It's what I learned back in the day, and so it's what sticks with me. There are many other programs to do these sort of things. GIMP, let's see, I've got GIMP, Corel Photo Paint, PaintShop Pro, PaintNet, and Piranesi is an interesting one, but it has sort of a different workflow, but also you could do some of this, some of the stuff in Piranesi. So there's lots of options for you. Don't think that this only applies to Photoshop, but we're going to, like I said, try and give you some ideas that you can apply to whatever you're doing, whatever you're using. So here is the basic Dennis technique that we're going to play around with. I am going to take and turn my large toolbar off. I've got a couple scenes here that you'll notice give us sort of different displays of this building. What I want to talk about is how to set those up and then what that's going to do for us in Photoshop. So in my scenes, I'm going to delete these and create them from scratch, actually. We'll just take these all and get rid of them, create them new. So to do this, let's have, we don't need entity info, we don't need, well, we might need components or outliner. Let's go into styles. Styles is going to be a big part of this. So we've got this model, we're going to pick, let's say this view, something that hopefully will be a little bit interesting. And the first thing we want to do is create, let's say, like we have here, just a thin line style. So, go to Edit and say Display my other edges, no profiles, and I've got hidden line mode on. So, you see I've got hidden line mode on, and I'm going to create a new style. And we'll just call it Lines. And I have to update that. Okay, Lines. As I create this in scenes, I've got camera and various things turned on. I want to add a scene, but first let's do something a little more. The people in the trees, I'm going to go ahead and, no, for this example, I'm sorry, I'm going to leave them as are. We'll come back to a different example later. So scenes, I'm going to add a scene, and I'm going to call it Lines. And then I'm going to come back in, add a new style, and I'll call it Color. Come in here, we want color or textures, if you've got those. And under edges, I don't need those edges, so turn those off. Update this scene and add this color. Okay, so this is kind of the idea. We're setting this up for various things. Let's go back, and this time we want some shadows. Now, this, like I say, there's variations of these techniques. This is my preference. I like the shadows on a different layer. Some of these techniques, they just incorporate the shadows into the actual color layer, but it's your personal preference. So I'm going to take shadows. I need them. I need them on faces. Why won't it let me choose on faces? Anybody got a guess? Because I'm kind of not sure why.
Are there faces?
Oh yeah, there's faces.
Are you in mode?
Yes, but that should not matter. So it's a funny thing.
Is it your sun angle?
No. No, it's not styles. That's a funny thing. I don't know. We're going to have to find out. It shouldn't matter. Well, well, this shoots me all to pieces. Okay. I am going to...
Is this component? Check info on this component. Maybe is it... Check it, click on that and check info on it.
We can see if it receives shadows, because that is a possibility.
Did you update your scene with the new style?
Let's find out. Let's go back and forth. We're still not getting shadows. Just to be sure. What's that?
How transparent?
What's that? No, it's not the access that we're getting. You know what, I'm just going to restart SketchUp just to see if we're getting a driver issue or something.
No, but if the surface is the image, the color is 69% or under in terms of opacity, then it won't take shadow.
Oh, certainly, and what is being pointed out is the windows, in fact, won't receive shadows, but we're not receiving shadows on even the solid surfaces. So, like I said, I'm going to restart. I'll save this so that we have our work saved to this point, and hopefully this will solve the issue. I think it's a video card issue that hopefully will be resolved if we restart. If it's not, this will be interesting.
Open up your old one.
Yeah, so I thought.
Do you intend to cover integration with Photoshop's 3D layer, the new stuff?
So the question is, do I intend to cover the integration with Photoshop Extended, which means that Photoshop can actually open 3D models, and I don't actually. But for those of you who have Photoshop Extended, you can actually, there's a plugin and you can bring models directly in from the warehouse, and it's pretty cool.
Is that only on CS3?
It's only on CS3 Extended. So there's Photoshop and there's Photoshop Extended, which lets you work with 3D models. There we go.
Where can we find that plugin?
You can find it on, yeah, Adobe Labs. Thank you. That's where you get it. Okay, so woohoo. Okay, we're back here and we're working now. This is what we need. So back to. Got my shadow settings. Let's go back to styles. Edit this. I want a new style. And this style, I'm going to go hidden line and turn my edges completely off. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you consider this a bug if you want, because it kind of is. When you look at the view here, if you exported this right now, you'd actually still have some edges. We're going to look at how to fix that and how to overcome that, but it's something that you need to keep aware of when you're doing something like this. It's just sort of an annoying bug that exists right now in SketchUp, and ideally we'll fix it. But you'll see that when I export this, I will likely still have some of these edges. Sometimes I just turn profiles on just because I know they're going to be on anyway, but the shadow settings that we want, turn your shadow settings really dark. Your light's not going to matter because we're in hidden line mode, but we do want really dark shadow settings. And I'll go ahead and turn these edges off, but I still think we're going to get some edges when we export this. And let's do a scene here. Make sure I updated my style, which I did not. I need a shadows. Shadows are not saved as part of the style, but this whole hidden line and turn the edges off is. So we're going to add that, and that's our shadows. Now, one of the advantages of doing this with the styles that you have over in the what was existing in the past is styles. You can create libraries of styles. So if you start creating some of these effects that work for you, you can just import these styles and then automatically apply them and save a lot of this trouble of the setting up, right? So you should only need to set this up like we're doing now one time. There's a couple things that you're going to have to do for each model, but a lot of this you can save through styles and just have it done. All right, let's take this example into Photoshop. So I am going to export each of these images, and I've got that to, I've just got a keyboard shortcut for that. So let's go to desktop. I'll just throw them right here. So I'll say shadows. Always check your options and turn this up to something that you, at a resolution that'll work good for you, something high. You're not going to be able to, we can't project very high, so I'm not going to make these really that big, and that'll save us time with the exporting as well. If you have SketchUp Pro, you can export this as an animation and do individual files. So that's another way that if you set up a bunch of scenes and just want to export them that way, you can do it. The options that you have over the file size, you still have those options. They're a little bit differently, so you may or may not want to do that, but color and lines. Okay, let's go to Photoshop. All right, so open up these files. Okay, so we've got the three files. They are not together in one file yet, and that's what we want to have them do. Let's just pick the color layer, and I'll select the line layer, drag it into this. Now it's not lined up, of course. If we turn the opacity down, we can see that. But I'm going to select everything, Control A, and then with these little align icons, I'm just going to say align vertically, align horizontally, and very quickly that's done. Grab my shadows, pull them in. I don't have to select everything yet, or again, it's already done, so I'll just hit these, and then I'll deselect because now we've got this ready, and I close these out. All right, so first thing that I'm going to do is take these shadows and make them a lot darker so that we only have shadows. I don't want the line work here. I've got the line work in a different layer, right? So I go up to Filter, let's see. Filter, yes, Blur. Choose a Gaussian blur. And put my radius up just a little bit, and that will do fine. I'm blurring out some of these other edges, and if you remember, this is not how we save the style. This is what I was talking about. It exported the lines, even though in SketchUp we had no lines. So you can still overcome that. And this is how we blur this, which means these lines are going to gray. And then under Image, I'm going to Adjustments, Levels. It's way over here. Push my whites out. You can see that's getting rid of those edges we don't want. And push the grays and the darks down to black. Okay. So now we've gotten rid of a lot of those edges that we don't need. Push that even further if we want, and say OK. And if you like, you can come back and blur it out a little more if you want a little more blurry shadows or not. That's a personal preference. But there we go. The reason I like to do my shadows on a different layer is I take that layer, that shadows layer, make it a multiply, and then I have control in Photoshop over how dark my shadows are by adjusting the opacity there. So it's just one more level of control, but it's not completely necessary if you don't want it. For now, I'm going to hide that and come down here and work on layer 1. Now, basically, what the dentist technique is this sort of, if we go pick a brush, and I pick some sort of, I don't know, natural-looking brush, something like that. And at its most basic level, I could just use the eraser tool on. Let me grab a brush for the eraser tool. And you start erasing out this foreground and bringing in the color. And with my opacity turned down, you're erasing it out in bits and pieces so that you're getting this sort of painted effect. That's, at a very basic level, what the dentist technique is. You just take two levels and you erase one out to the other, and you create kind of this cool effect. What probably got too carried away and have too much history here. I do, in fact. And the reason, let me show you a different way to do this, which will be better because we won't have this problem of, I erased too much, I didn't have enough history saved, so let me quick open up that file again and bring it in. So, open. I want my lines again. I'm using the F key, which will cycle me through the modes so I can see. Bring it in, Control A, toggle, or align, I should say. All right, now, layer 1, I'm going to delete. A better way to do this is to add what's called an adjustment layer. So if I turn layer 3 back on, I add right here an adjustment layer. That's not an adjustment layer, I'm sorry. This is an adjustment layer. No, it's not. That was. An adjustment layer means that this layer we're going to paint on is going to create the transparency for this layer, but we're not actually painting on the layer. And it works like this. I've got black and white selected for my colors, and with a brush, if I paint white, nothing happens. I'm going to turn my opacity up, okay, so that I've got good dramatic effect. Nothing happens. If I switch my colors, keyboard shortcut X, and I paint, you see we're actually painting out and getting the color behind. Let me show you what's happening. This is the adjustment layer. Okay, so as I paint on this layer, if I come back here, more of the other layer shows through. But if I paint, or if go back to, if I switch back to white and paint, let me turn this back up.
You're on the layer now.
Oh, thank you. Better undo. Let me get back on the adjustment. You see you can be on the adjustment or the other layer. So painting back on the adjustment layer, I can bring it back. Okay. So with that keyboard shortcut X, I can quickly come in and say, well, I want more color to show through here. I'll wash it out a little bit. And that's the sort of thing. And then, of course, I can take my layers, turn those on. Shadows. Darken them up if I want. Add an adjustment layer to the shadows. And take my brush opacity down. Cut some of that out. So that's sort of a, coming back and forth variation of what has become known as the dentist technique. But the thing about it that I hope you'll take away is not necessarily if this technique works for you or not, but the idea is that you take multiple layers or multiple exports from SketchUp and you stick them in Photoshop or your preferred image editing program, and you start to wash them out between each other to create some painterly effects. Let's dig up another example and look at this again. Yes?
Is it purple on the screen just because it's being projected, or because you somehow made your shadows purple? Or?
It's just the projection.
Oh, okay.
I really like purple. No, I'm not seeing that, so that's, yeah, you're getting color tint from the projection.
What does the level or the adjustment layer do that the layer masks go?
So the question is, what does an adjustment layer do that layer masks don't? And I'm actually going to defer if somebody wants to answer that who can answer it better than I.
What you used was actually called the layer mask.
So,
Okay, that's okay.
okay,
You was
same
using a
thing.
layer mask. And an adjustment layer is a separate feature that uses layer mask.
Do you see why I said I was nervous about it? I'm like, I know SketchUp.
That was a layer mask.
Layer mask, thank you. We added a layer mask.
For an adjustment.
For an adjustment. Let's quick open this example. Now in this one, again, I've got these things, various things set up, and actually that's not what we want. Some of this stuff we're going to come to in just a little bit, but again, and this actually is going to work as a little bit better example than the first one, because in this example I was moving too quickly, and it's nice if you have edges bleeding off, because in that case what we can do is, let's say, let's open up, and I've already exported some images from that previous model, as you saw So as you see here, I've got some various options here. So there's my lines. There's shadows. So I'll take that one, and maybe that one. Actually, I'll take this guy. Let's open those up. So we are going to add a mask. You start to paint this out, and with the line work, but let's do it the other way. I'm going to undo that, undo before the mask, double click on the background layer, create a layer, and let me layer these differently, pull this below. This time, let's say we want to do the mask here. Oops.
Or set it to multiply.
Yeah, I had just accidentally swapped my layers. So
You're painting on the image, not the mask.
okay, let's get this. I think at this point now we're correct. Now we're going to paint out some of the darker shadows. Turn the brush up, and I'm using a Wacom tablet, which is very helpful when you're doing this sort of thing. For this particular one, when you turn your opacity down, you can do it certainly with just a mouse. But Wacom is very nice because it gives you the pressure sensitivity. But in this case, we sort of get this nice, and we'll bleed it off to the edges. And then in the, because we're taking and seeing through our line layer, if we turn that off. But in the line layer, or I'm sorry, in this lower layer, we could start to erase some of that out too. Or, actually, let's go back to the line layer. And this time I am just going to paint directly on this and switch to white and paint out some of these furthermost edges. Anyway, it's just to try and spawn ideas, right? So you get some ideas of things that you could try. So now, one thing that's a little different now than when this came about is that we have watermarks now in SketchUp. So to some extent, you can get this effect directly in SketchUp. And in the way that you do that, I'm going to press the Alt key and touch on this. And I'm just going to paint in sort of various. There we go, yada, yada, yada. Scribbly texture. And I'm going to select that and copy it. I'm going to start a new file. I paste it in. I'm going to save this out as a separate image, so come up to File and we'll save it out. JPEG or other is fine. SketchUp does support alpha channels, but in this case, a JPEG will work fine. And we'll just say sketchy blob. All right. So back here, let's come to, say, this view. And under Styles, if you haven't played with this yet, you have the option of what's called a watermark, and we add. Let's see, where did we put it? Right here.
Saving. Go back in Photoshop.
I didn't. Thank you. Okay, good. All this stuff's running off my screen. I'm glad you guys are seeing it. I'm obviously not. Sketchy blob. Open it up. Okay, so we can create this as an overlay, as a background. You kind of see what the effect that's going on. We'll try overlay. And you can add multiples of these too. So we'll say overlay for this one. Next. We want to create a mask based on the image. Now in this case, I obviously did it wrong. So in Photoshop, I might take this and say, let's select all and go to adjustments and invert it. So let me go back and I'll say I'll make it a background instead of, let me turn the mask off. I'll make it a background. I can take the image down. Next, unlock the aspect ratio so it stretches across, and I can say finish. I'll add another one, this one being the correct with the dark edges. Overlay, next, create mask. And you can adjust between the image and okay, so you get sort of a similar effect directly in SketchUp. So that's kind of cool too. That didn't exist in the past, but you can get more control, certainly if you do it yourself in Photoshop, but the option's there to do something like this. So that is one way to sort of work with SketchUp and Photoshop, is taking these images, exporting them out, and then sort of painting them into each other, this sort of thing. The next way, and there's two ways that I think work well. That's the first one, right? You just have a number of images, you stack them up, and then you start painting into each other, or erasing, or running filters and running them into each other. The second thing that I think is useful is that you can create settings within Photoshop that will help you to make quick selections. Within SketchUp, that will help you make quick selections within Photoshop. And so let's talk about what that means. And for that, let's start out with this example. Okay, so rather than go through setting all this up like we did before, you can see I've got a couple scenes. The key here is that for the effect I want to create, the shadow settings, I could have them on faces or on ground. There is a difference. So if this won't work for every model that you have if you can't place it on the ground, but for this it does. So I have on faces and on ground, and I have those separate. That's going to be useful to me. And then I have color, and I actually have used a flat color, which you can achieve by turning your light. You see how we get the gradients? Well, turn that all the way down, and then you can get a flat color. So edges, profiles, this sort of thing. So want to export these, and I have so let's close out of some of these. All right, so again, let me find my color layer. That's a good base layer to work from. I'll just drag these in and line them up.
If you hold the shift key when you drag, you won't have to align them. They'll show up in the exact place it is.
Fantastic. So the observation was if you hold the shift key, and you see this works beautifully, you do not have to align them. I love...
It only works if they're exactly the same size and resolution.
Right, so make sure that you're exporting at the same dimensions. And a good thing to keep in mind on that is that's another reason why we've made scenes here, so that we can come back. However, come back and say, well, I forgot one option, I'd like to export again. That does depend on your SketchUp. If you close out like this and then reopen and you've adjusted your screen, it's going to be difficult to get the same exact image that you got before, unfortunately. But thank you. Beautiful tip. I knew there'd be stuff like that. It's just like, I know I'm walking into this hornet's nest, if you will. But I knew you guys would be forgiving. So here's what we're going to do. Just like before, we would take, and we want this to be very dark shadows. I want these to be purely black shadows for a couple reasons, and some different than last time. For those of you who aren't familiar, something like that is a beautiful candidate for actions in Photoshop. Actions are a set of just directions, so Photoshop can follow the same thing, and they're actually, you can create some really complex actions. And I suggest you ask one of these fine Photoshop users about that. I know only how to create basic actions, so I'm going to come in and say I want a new action, and we'll just call it shadows, and say assign it a function key of, let's say F4, and record. So now I go in, I want to Gaussian blur it just like we did before, then go to image adjustments, levels, push my shadows so that they're really dark. Okay. And then I'm not going to blur it again. Well, not as much. Something like that. So it's recorded all that. I say stop recording the action. And I'm going to push this back in. Now I'm going to turn this off. Layer 4, I just hit F4. It runs the action and it's done. So layer 3, if I wanted to do that, I could do that as well. So that's pretty, actions are pretty cool for speeding up your workflow. What I do want to do now, and the reason I made these different, is I want to select these shadows. So image, so I want to come up and say, what am I going? Select color range. And I could, because they're dark, just say shadows, or as we'll see, I could select the sampled colors. Shadows is fine though. I now have this selection of this shadows. I'm going to save that. So select, save selection. We'll call it core shadows. And deselect it, turn that off. And same thing, I want to select, not load. I want to select color range, shadows, and save this as a selection. Say ground. I'm going to turn those off now, or I can delete them. That's all I wanted that for, is just so that I could make quick selections, and I wanted it to be different from the ground and from the actual shadows on the object. So now I'm going to create a new layer. Control-Shift-In, new layer. I'm going to start messing around and doing some stuff on this new layer. But first, I want to create a new brush. Again, this is, when you're painting these type of things, creating your own brushes is a great way to get sort of different feels, and you can do a lot of stuff with brushes. Brushes are pretty powerful. I'll create a width, 2000 is fine, but I'm going to create a height of about only 30 actually. We'll start out a little bigger. And for what I want to do, I'm going to create a brush that looks like this. Let me get my brushes, and I'm going to make this pure black. Okay, so if I deselect it, it looks like this. And just to keep it a little cleaner, I'm going to use the crop tool and crop it down. That's going to be my brush. So I go up to, select it all, And then under the edit menu, I'm going to define brush preset. Now as you'll see, something like this would be a good candidate for a pattern or just for another JPEG or something file that you just bring in. But for this example, we're just going to use a brush. And under brushes, just here, I want to have that open for a moment, and let me close this other down. This is what we want to do. I want to create this sort of different shadow effect than what you can get in SketchUp. So under this layer, I say I want to select load selection, and let's first do the core shadows. Control H will hide your selection, but it's still selected. If I were to see, you could see that. But under brushes, I'm going to right click and come down here. And here's this new brush we created. Now you can see what it is right now. Under the brushes menu, we can actually make some changes to this. And this is, again, brushes, there's very deep what you can do with brushes. For our purposes, I just want to go to the brush tip shape, which will let us change the orientation and spacing. And let me deselect. So I've got this selected. Let me deselect just for now so that we can test out this brush. That's far too thick, so under spacing, I'm going to turn it up. So that starts to look better, but the brush itself is too thick for me, so I'm going to turn that down. Something like that. It starts to do a little more what I like it to do. Okay, so something like that, and the spacing, or I'm sorry, the angle of it, I want it to be, yeah, like that. Okay, now go back to select, load selection, go to my core shadows, and my core shadows are going to be like this. Now on the same layer, or a different layer, this time, deselect that and say select, I want a load selection and have my ground shadows. Again, under brushes, this is why I made them differently, so that I could have different orientation. So I say maybe something like that, or maybe something like that, or maybe a crosshatch like that. Maybe that'll look do well. So let's do something like that, sure. Hide this, come in, paint that, brushes back out. Okay, so the notion here is that there's things that you can do in SketchUp to give you some kind of cool selections in Photoshop that you can then play with, right? So these type of shadows aren't available in Photoshop. I know that Susan is just dying for me to say that, in fact, there is a plugin soon to be released where there actually this type of shadows will be available in SketchUp. So that will be there, but this is an option as well. And then, of course, we can take this layer and combine it with the other layers, and let's multiply this layer, and create some more effects that we don't have time to play around with. But once you're just playing around, you sort of get crazy, and a lot of things you can do. Take this layer, bring its opacity down, turn it to different blending mode, so that we get sort of different things going on. And I'm not picking one that works, that does anything, so that's okay. Let's look at one more example. I want to show you some other ways that we can combine SketchUp and Photoshop. So, oh, and I should acknowledge, let me be fair, I didn't model this helicopter. I found it on the warehouse. It was modeled by William T. I don't know who that is on the warehouse, but he does some pretty outstanding models. He's got a lot of these sort of aircraft and other vehicle models, so full credit to him for modeling this, creating this model. All right.
People.
What's that?
Where'd you get the people?
I made them. I just wanted some generic people. So this, there's only 3 components in here of the people, but just, I just wanted generic people.
Generic's good.
I like them too. Okay, so let's go through some of these things. In this case, I want more options than just the shadows. And let's look at a little bit how to do that. So again, under my scenes, I'll just go ahead and get rid of all of these. And we'll create them anew. First thing I want to do, excuse me, when you have a scene that's somewhat complex like this, and if you had trees and stuff like that, picking the sky out, you'd have to go into Photoshop, you'd have to pick it out between these little crevices and all sorts of things like this. So I want to create a style that will let me easily select the sky and create sort of a different sky. Under styles, we're going to do that. Let's say, now you might think you do that with the sky, but the sky is actually gradiated, so that's not going to work for us. Background, however, will. I'm going to create some very vibrant color background, so we get like that. And in truth, this might work for you, but just to be sure, I'm going to use the sun for shading, take my lights and darks down, something like this. So that I
Use the sun for shading?
what's that?
What does that mean? Use the sun for shading?
Use the sun for shading. The question is, what does that mean? If you'll notice, I have shadows on and off, but these surfaces are still dark because I've got that checked. It means that even though you turn the shadows themselves off, the surfaces will reflect the sun or not based on where it's at. So by turning these dark, but this doesn't reflect the sun, now if I turn that on, I've got, so I've got this, and we'll save this out. You could also, not through this way, but very vibrant color. We'll save this out as a scene. Let's make sure and save our style. Scene 1, which is our sky. Okay, another thing that would be interesting to do is to be able to access all these windows immediately. The nice thing about that is that when you're working, if you've painted your windows and stuff with a similar material, then you can quickly access that material. So let's create a new style. Oops. And this time I'm going to get rid of that background. I don't want textures, this will be fine. But I do want to see let's find the glass. Okay, there's the glass. Change it to something really vibrant. And we're not seeing it that much because we've still got this sun and shadows working against us. But actually, let's make it, anyway, just something really vibrant that'd be easy to pick. Just something that'll be different for us. Anything that'll work. Red will be good. So we've got that, and save that out. Now, one of the other things that is useful at this point is breaking your scene apart into its various elements. And by that I mean, I've got all these people and some lamps and various entourage. I don't have trees going on, but for these purposes, I do have all these people. And it actually would be kind of helpful to have those separated so that we can bring those in as a separate layer, aside from the rest of the model. So before I save this scene, I want to select these people and show you a couple quick ways to do that. Obviously, selecting them individually like this would be somewhat tedious. So I can either come in and lock just a few of these larger groups that I've got, and then just big old selection, say, oh, okay, I need to lock this too. And lock those. But I should be able to, at some point, come in and say, well, I'm just going to select these people. Let me make my selections right. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it that I think works really well is I'll just say, give me, through the outliner, all my people. And this works better for me. You could also do it through the component menu and say select instances, but because I have various people, but they were all called Simple Man, blah, 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 I could do it easier through the outliner than going through and select instances through the component menu. So I've got all those selected. I'm going to group them and either hide them or put them on a layer. For now, I'll just hide them. And then come in and add my scene so that it will remember that what's hidden. Better. Do the same thing where I can unhide them and select everything else. Now I've got it all locked. Let's so get rid of all this other stuff, hide it. Now I've got just the people. Add a new scene. Unhide everything and continue and do things, with your textures and your colors and just a line work. So, yeah, again, this somewhat a little bit set up front, but if it's something that you do frequently, then you set things like your sky and other things up, and then you just take those styles, use them again. Some things obviously you have to set up per model, right? The people or your entourage, some of this type of thing. So that's okay. But we're not going to belabor that too much longer because we need to keep going. I do want lines, and then we'll cut out of here and back into Photoshop. So styles, I am just going to select one of the ones I had before. Let's say. And say just turn profiles. And add a scene. Okay. Another useful one is fog. Fog is really useful to play with actually now. Let's see, we need display fog, turn it, and use background color, turn that off, do something like black. And what this gives you in various programs, they'll actually read this as sort of a depth map, meaning they can do certain effects based on this, how light or dark it is, and because all the light stuff's in the foreground, all the dark stuff's in the background, you can create some cool effects with that too. definitely something to play with is the fog. And fog is also something that you can save so that we have our various scenes here. Okay, let's pull some of these out. So, export this. I've got my timing for my scene set for, so you see it like fading in. But and in this case, let me go ahead before I export it and take a real quick look at my materials and turn those back down so I don't get any of that reddish when I'm selecting my orange. But I'll export that. All right, so oops, where did we put that? Well, where did I put him? All right, so hold Shift, bring them in. All right, now comes the fun. So I'm going to take the eyedropper tool. Just hit eyedropper, select this color. So I've got this color selected. Now under select, I say color range. Turn this up a little bit to get everything, and I say okay. Now we've got the sky done. Save it. Turn that off. Come in here. We could do similar other things. But let's take our people, turn to multiply, say for right now. Come in, let's say we'll select that red, do the same thing, select color range, turn it up. Now we've got all our windows selected. Save that. Okay, we don't need this guy anymore. And let me actually come back in here. I need one more scene of just the basic model. So, styles. Come back in and going to hide those and quick export this without making the scene or anything, but oh, I did not hold Shift. Okay. All right, so now on this layer, we're going to start to to have a little more fun. So I'm going to create a new layer and put it up here at the top. I'm not good about naming my layers and how you work with layers in Photoshop but ideally I should name that sky, because that's what we're going to do. Is let's load the selection of the sky, and then we'll say go to the gradient tool, pick a nice sort of orange and deep purple color, and then what we want to do is create a gradient for our sky. And we can play around with doing that differently, and there's lots of options for creating very interesting gradients and various variations of them. We can double click and get this sort of thing. If I create a new layer, I can get variations on that. Let me turn that opacity down. Anyway, play around with it. Now I did this, let's back up to something like this. Then you can also do something like this. You say, let's open up oh, sorry, it's up here. Something like just this picture. Now this sunset itself may not work for us, but we can bring it in, change it to a different display mode, play around with these, and I still have that selection selected, so I'm going to deselect, change this so it looks like we like, but then load that selection sky. I'm actually going to invert it and then hit delete and delete out the image that we don't need. So now we're running out of time. Another thing that we do is come in here, say we'll select load selection, the windows. We don't have a very dark scene going on because I didn't export out good shadows, but you can still get the effect of, if I come in, let me get back to a regular brush, pick a nice bright color and then start painting in these windows, and we'll get some lighting effects. And you can get more so, as we paint this, by coming in and say, let's select, let's modify it, and let's feather the border out, say 5 or 10 or even more pixels to get this glow effect. So let's say 15. I'm going to zoom in so you can get some of the effect of what's going on. Let's see if I've got anything in here. When I was playing around earlier, no, I don't think I do. Anyway, we are pretty much out of time. That's the notion. As I promised, we didn't really take anything to finish. In fact, did a horrible job of finishing some of these. But hopefully you get the idea that you can create certain settings within SketchUp to either, one, export multiple images and overlay them in an interesting way, or 2, export images that will act as quick selection sets so that you can paint out windows, sky, people, trees, all this sort of thing, and start to paint this in. Create some really fun renderings and paintings and make it easier for you to do so. So that's the idea, hopefully, that you can take away. Questions? Any questions?
Can you just show a little fast, you know, you got one layer which shows this fog.
Yeah.
Are you using this layer? Just really fast, you know, if you don't mind.
We'll show the results.
So I've got this layer. Let's move it up here to the top, and turn it on. There's a number of ways that you could use this layer. If I make it normal, you can obviously see I'm getting stuff darkening in the background, or if I select it and invert that, then you get, kind of this really good fog effect. One of the things that you can do with the fog layer that I didn't show, but it's actually I show in video, in our video tutorials, is that you can create this depth of field using fog. I'm going to invert this back. And the depth of field, if I take this image, and I don't know how well it's going to work with this example, but I'm going to copy it and create. You know what? I'm going to mess it up. It's in video. I don't know if I have one, Susan. I'm sorry. A couple tips that are nice to try is sometimes you're working on these things and you've got all sorts of various layers going on. A couple tips that are helpful is, let's say this sky layer that we made overlay, if we make it normal, if you hit the Shift plus or minus keys, you can actually cycle through the blend modes for that layer. So you can test it out and say, what's going to work well.
Shift plus what?
Shift plus the plus or minus keys. You can also take that layer, and let me deselect.
You can, I think, also highlight and scroll. If you highlight the linear blur, you highlight that, you can scroll it just with your mouse, which is basically the same thing.
Well, you can do this, but you have to pick a new one each time.
No, you now scroll it.
Oh.
Scroll it. Yeah.
I don't have a mouse.
I'll
But what he's saying is that if you're working off of a mouse, you can scroll, and someone's suggesting I should be able to
Or one of the side keys.
use the side keys, but I probably got them all configured wrong, which I do. You can grab a layer, and using the bracket keys and the control, I believe you can move layers up and down. But one that I've found to be useful is that you can, let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. You can do, when you have multiple layers going on, and sometimes you want to see what that would look like, or run a filter, but you've got 8 different layers. So I've got these layers visible to create this effect right now. What's the keyboard shortcut? If I hit Control-Alt-E, well, it's supposed to work. I create this new layer that's a merge of all my visible layers. Now, that's not working, clearly. So I am going to merge visible while holding the Alt key, and that did it for me. So now I could turn off all these other layers. I've got a new layer that's a combination of my previous visible layers, which I could then go in and try some various filters on and that sort of thing. That's a nice one that I like to use. Yeah.
Do you know, opening it in extended, do you gain, what can you do that you haven't shown us already?
So extended, if we go File, Automate, I think it's under Automate. Yeah, there it is. Search Google for 3D model. There's nothing that we've talked about that you cannot do in regular Photoshop. This is the behavior of Photoshop extended, in that it actually allows you to import a 3D model, rotate it, view it, and then paint on it. So it opens up the warehouse. I could find a model. It actually, it works really well. It's pretty cool. It does create pretty big Photoshop files, and working with it in Photoshop is sometimes, interesting. But so we're not going to actually bring it in, but it's kind of like layout, where you can bring a SketchUp model in, view it, spin it, zoom in and out and that, and then you can paint on it and run filters on it, do all sorts of things. And it's nice because it keeps the background different from the foreground. Does some cool stuff. So yeah, we're out of time. Thank you very much.